Okay, this is topic 21. It kind of follows on from topic 19 and fits in with ecology 2 that you'll have the booklets for. This is human influences on the ecosystem, so how we affect ecosystems. And the first mini topic is about food supply. Now, before I go into it, I just want to show you something I've made for you. This is a spider diagram or a flowchart, whatever you want, that kind of summarizes the topic. So as you can see, we're looking at food supply, and this spider diagram summarizes food supply, because I feel like this PowerPoint is very wordy. This is for those of you who've struggled with that, and therefore you can just begin to look at the main points of it and build up your knowledge from there, maybe by printing this out and then adding notes to each bit from the PowerPoint. I think that would be a really good practice. So let's get into the topic. Stop wasting time. The first few objectives are here, and the first one is to state how modern technology, the things that we do these days as a result of having better technology, results in an increased food production for us, not the ecosystems. So I've summarized that here, okay? And modern technology is a huge topic, okay, and it fits into the food supply section. And basically it comes down to quite a few things: agricultural intensification, chemical fertilizers, monoculture, pesticides, and selective breeding. Now, all these things are about making our food supply as good as possible. Agricultural intensification is basically about farming, it says there. So it's about clearing land so we can use it for farms. It destroys rainforests because we have to clear them out to make way for the farms, and therefore reduces biodiversity. Now, biodiversity comes up all over this topic. Biodiversity is basically the variation of different organisms in a certain area. That could be within the organism species, so variety between them, between their genes, or it could be variety between the different species in the population. So you could have lots of different types of species, as well as different species, as well as different characteristics within each species. So agricultural intensification to produce more food from farmland reduces biodiversity. The next thing is chemical fertilizers. Again, it's fairly standard. These are to increase the yield of crops, fairly standard. Now, normally bacteria are involved in the recycling of nutrients. We talked about that a bit in topic 19 with the recycling of nitrates back into the soil for plants to use. Remember that they came from decaying matter, like dead animals and feces. So the bacteria use natural recycling to put nutrients back in the soil, and they're a form of natural fertilizer, and that's fine. But if you take a lot of the organic matter out of the soil, like if you clear it, like destroying a rainforest, then that means there's not a lot of organic matter, like dead animals or whatnot, for the decomposers to return nutrients to the soil. So that's going to reduce the amount of nutrients and minerals and whatnot for the plants to absorb, and it's going to reduce their growth rate. We could use manure, which is really, really good, because it increases the amount of nutrients in the soil, but also has a lot of other jobs, like making the soil more water absorbent, which reduces flooding. So manure is a really good thing to use, and it's pretty much as good as chemical fertilizers, but chemical fertilizers are just that bit better. And because of the demand for food, it means that chemical fertilizers, even though pretty similar to manure, is used instead because it's that bit more efficient. So it increases the yield of crops. That just means the amount they sell for money, which is obviously what the farmers are there for. It's a business. It means there's no organic matter for decomposers, as we said here, and the chemical fertilizers themselves can pollute water systems, which is really bad. Monoculture It's fairly simple. It just means having only one plant species. So when you see rows and rows of one type of plant in a crop field, that's monoculture, and that reduces biodiversity. Again, biodiversity. Now this bit here is because this is objective B, just like this is objective A. I couldn't see the point of making a whole new part of a spider diagram for just objective B, because it fits quite nicely into here. Objective B is to talk about monoculture in a bit more detail. Basically, it reduces the habitat space of certain organisms, because if they're living in one area, let's say one type of plant, and then suddenly they're destroyed for, you know, a different type of plant that's going to be monocultured, they're going to have less habitat space to thrive. If an animal likes to feed on that plant that's just been removed, then that's going to have less place to thrive, because they're not going to hang around if there's no food there for them to eat. Any competing organisms will perish, so any organisms that would eat those other plants that were just destroyed will perish, because they can't survive if there's no food source. And also on top of that, the obvious one, other plants that are not required, i.e. competing for the resources, are all just completely removed, so they perish. Next, pesticides. These are fairly obvious, you should be aware of these. The two main ones are herbicides and insecticides. Herbicides kill plants, insecticides kill insects, but only really the ones that compete with the plant that you're trying to grow and as a crop. However, they do kill indiscriminately, and now what that means is the pesticides you spray, whether it's insecticides or herbicides, they'll kill a lot more than you want. Now they're pretty good at getting them to kill what they need, but sometimes they kill more, and that kills indiscriminately, and you're, you know, reducing the amount of biodiversity because of that. It also affects food webs, because if you kill a certain species of plant, one primary consumer might only eat that type of plant and therefore die off. Then you have a gap in your food web, and well, that can have a knock-on effect. The last thing is selective breeding. Now selective breeding is really easy. Do it with dogs and cows all the time. They breed only the ones with desired features. So for example, a cow, you would want it to have the best milk, produce the most milk, the highest meat mass. So you'd take the male and the female with those desired characteristics, breed them together, and eventually over generations you'd get rid of your unwanted features. They'd be discarded. And the only problem with that is it reduces biodiversity again, so if a disease did come along, it would wipe them all out because they'd all have similar genes. It does affect fitness over the years, apparently. I'm not too sure how that works, but it does affect fitness over the years. I think it's due to the genes that are passed on from generation to generation. Variation between the organisms, again, is lower, and that's a type of biodiversity. Some genes that are passed on as well are not noticed, maybe because they're not acting, but can be secretly passed on without being noticed, but then come into effect at a later generation and actually be harmful, but we wouldn't know because they weren't in effect before. So the point is, harmful genes can be passed on in that process without us knowing. So that's objective A, modern technology. It's the biggest part of the topic. Okay, I also want to mention this graph. This relates to how we were talking about the use of manure and how it's almost as good as chemical fertilizers. As you can see here, all the different experimental plots that were missing certain things, like this one had no nitrogen, this one the soil had no phosphates, this one no magnesium, and these are the yields that they produced. Obviously the best one is using the chemical fertilizer, but look how close it is using farmyard manure compared to using no manure. So manure is really, really good, but at the end of the day, it's not as good as chemical fertilizers, so they use that instead. Another graph I want to make you aware of, and this relates to the pesticide use, is this one here, and this is how the introduction of an insecticide here affects the populations of arthropods like springtails and mites. As you have the insecticide added, it decreases obviously, because as months pass, the concentration in the soil will decrease. But as you add it, obviously the numbers of arthropods will decrease, But as the concentration of insecticide decreases, the number of springtails and mites will increase again. Springtails even above the numbers that they were at originally. One thing to say here is that what you can do to affect these arthropods less is, rather than spraying the soil with insecticide, you can actually dip the seeds in insecticide so that only the seeds are protected and the rest of the soil can be free of insecticides mostly. The only problem with that is then that birds that eat the seeds would then get infected, and then the insecticide would build up in the food chain as normal, which is obviously a bad thing. One other thing that we can mention here is biological control. A biological control is something you can use instead of a pesticide. A biological control is another organism that you put into play to kill off the pest that you have originally. The only problem with that is, A, it reduces the amount of pest you have, and that can affect the food chain. It can have a knock-on effect, creating a gap. But also the biological control animal that's ridding you of the pest could then become the pest itself. So yeah, biological control can be used. It's better than polluting the environment with pesticides, but it can have side effects. Next is to talk about Objective C, and it's the negative impacts on an ecosystem of intensive livestock production. Now, remember the definition for ecosystem, simply put, is all the species, all the populations of species in an area with their biotic and abiotic factors, so all the living and non-living factors. So here is the main points, and it's fairly simple. Intensive livestock production is just basically where we farm our cows and chickens and livestock like that, and they're normally raised in sheds. So very tight, confined spaces, which obviously has all the negative social aspects of keeping animals in those conditions. But as well as that, all their feces and urine forms a slurry, which can then enter water systems as it passes out the shed with rain and then follows into rivers, which can cause eutrophication. We'll talk about eutrophication another time in more detail. Also, overgrazing on certain areas is a bad thing. Areas of grazed areas are called pastures, and if you were to overgraze on a pasture, it means that obviously you're reducing the biodiversity of that area of land, but also removing a food source for other organisms. Okay, Objective B is basically about providing food. It's to discuss the implications of providing sufficient food for humans. Now, famine is where you have a severe food shortage, and because of that we need to import food. Countries that can't grow food, like Kuwait, because of the climate, have to import food. Now that's fine for Kuwait because they have the oil industry that they can make money off to buy imports, but for countries like northern parts of Africa, where they have desert-like conditions but they don't have anything to sell, it means that they can't really afford to import that much food. But also to think about, for countries who can afford to buy imports, like Kuwait, the fresh food perishes quickly, as we all know. So they have to treat it, which is bad because you're putting chemicals onto the food, or you have to pick it early and then give it chemicals to help it to ripe. So that's one issue. Cash crops is where a poor country would grow crops that it could grow and then sell them to make some money, but it would mean that the locals are going hungry. We'll go straight onto Objective E. It's just to list all the causes of famine. Now, there's loads of causes here. Haven't listed them all here because I've just put the main ones. So the causes of basically hunger in an area: drought, pollution, deforestation, increasing population, and natural disasters. I'm sure you can all talk around them. Natural disasters like tsunamis obviously can ruin farmland and ruin crops and forests, and destroy animals. Drought, no water, no plants, animals can die. Pollution can cause eutrophication, which can destroy marine life. Deforestation, we've talked about. Increasing population puts a demand on resources. There's also other things like water shortages, which kind of relates to the drought. pesticide damage or disease. Urbanization means to build cities like over farms where you would be growing food. War, obviously, if you're going to farm, then if there's a war, you're probably not going to be out there farming. So lots to talk about there. Okay, and the next topic I want to talk about is still topic 21, but 21.2, and that's habitat destruction. So about how habitats are destroyed. Only 4 objectives this time, and the first one is to describe the reasons for habitat destruction. Okay, the first objective is to describe the reasons for habitat destruction. Now, on this mind map, there's actually no title for the topic, but it is actually, 21.2 habitat destruction. All of this is on the Google Drive for you to access now. So, the reasons, objective A, removal of habitat. That can obviously destroy habitats if you're removing them. And you do that for urbanization, which is like building cities. You can also do it for agriculture, so building farms. One thing I haven't put in here is a thing called FAWG. This is just a group of people that promote and encourage wildlife to grow on farmland. So what they do is where farmers would normally cut down hedgerows on the edge of hedges to make more space for crops, they're actually putting protection signs so that farmers can't do that. And it's it's beneficial because it increases biodiversity. Those hedgerows have a lot of organisms thriving in them because they can't exactly grow on the crops, or they'll be killed using pesticides. The next reason of habitat destruction is how we extract natural resources. Now, we have a high demand for resources because obviously the populations are increasing in the world. Therefore, we're doing a lot of mining. Mining is, basically blowing up a side of, a rocky area and digging into it to find, certain minerals or whatever, resources, raw materials. And that means that habitats around those areas are being destroyed. Lots more than that, though. You could put deforestation, finding raw materials from forests, drilling into the crust to get oil. These are all things that processes where we're extracting natural resources. Accidents can happen, like oil spills. So these things are about extracting natural resources. Accidents can happen. Oil spillages whilst trying to extract oil is a major issue that can affect marine life. On the note of marine pollution, and these are all the things that can affect it. Marine, it just means like the aquatic animals, so like all your fish and whatnot, and the plants that grow in the sea. Sewage, fertilizers, pesticides, plastics that don't biodegrade, so just stay in the environment for years and years and years. Oil and microparticles, these are all the things that affect marine pollution. Sewage can cause eutrophication, we'll talk about in more detail later. Fertilizers can also do that, and it's because of the chemicals that they create from sewage. Pesticides we've talked about, if they leak into marine life, they can cause eutrophication as well. Plastics can kill animals, period. If they're eating them as well, that can also kill them. Oil spills can kill animals. Microparticles are just tiny particles as a result of industry, and if organisms ingest them, they can collect in organs, and just like salt collects in our kidneys and causes kidney stones, it can cause the organs to break, and then the organism would die. Objective B is to state that humans, we have a negative impact by affecting food webs and food chains. Now, it's fairly simple, to be honest. If we take an organism out of a food chain or a food web, that means that it has a knock-on effect on others, and therefore they won't be able to have a food source. Or, if we take out a predator for one organism, that organism might increase in population and reduce or overcompete or outcompete another organism, and that organism might perish. Another thing that we do is we allow toxins to build up in our food chains. Chemicals like DDT, which is like an insecticide that we spray onto crops, can build up and kill top predators. We'll talk more about this stuff later. Objective C, moving on, is about the undesirable effects of deforestation. Now, you talk about deforestation a hell of a lot in this topic. It's basically the removal of forest land, and that reduces the amount of habitats available for organisms. which can cause extinction and endangerment. Endangerment means there's only a few left, and extinction means that they're gone. Objective D fits nicely into this, so I just added it here. This means you lose your species that forever, they're gone forever because you've cut down a large area of land which might be the only place they thrive. This reduces biodiversity, keyword again, and some of these things that we're killing actually have chemicals in them that can help cure or help diseases like cancer. Soil erosion occurs because if you deforest an area, the trees that anchor the soil in place and hold the soil there aren't there. So the soil can actually, as it's eroded and washed away, it can build up in water systems like rivers and pollute them and stop them from thriving. And because the soil is being eroded, and soil's really good at absorbing water, once it's eroded and gone, that means that the soil can't absorb as much water, or the ground can't, so there's a lot more flooding. CO2 builds up in the atmosphere because you've got no trees taking in the CO2 because they've all gone, which can cause global warming because CO2 is a greenhouse gas and it absorbs heat energy from the sun, and that can cause climate change, which is where the weather in a certain area changes, but that can have massive effects on the crops you can grow and different things like that. Objective D here now, solely nothing to do with Objective C, apart from the link to deforestation. And basically it's about transpiration. Because you have no trees, you have less transpiration. Now the trees in a rainforest would create a lot of water vapor from transpiration, which would create clouds above the rainforest. And now if you've got a massive rainforest, that's going to basically dictate what kind of climate you've got in that country and or area. Now if you cut down all the trees, there'll be a lot less transpiration, and that'll mean you had definitely got climate change. Before deforestation, you could have a lot of rain clouds from the transpired water vapor, which would reflect the sunlight from the sun, making the area a lot less hot, more cool and humid, not as dry, because it's got a lot of water vapor in the air from the transpiration. However, once you cut down all the trees, after deforestation, there's no cloud cover, and the water vapor's not there, so the climate becomes very hot and dry. Okay, so another thing I want to talk to you about here is basically an overview of deforestation and a few other things that can contribute to soil erosion. So rain falls down on rainforests. Now rainforests are really good at absorbing water and distributing it around an area in small doses, like through streams and slow moving water systems. When the trees are cut down, it means that they're not holding in place certain soil. So soil can be washed down the hillside and or mountain. Also here, where animals have been grazing and overgrazing on land mass, the grass has gone, and that grass cover not being there will allow more soil to travel down and be eroded. This sloping land that's been ploughed obviously brings loose soil to the top, which is then pushed further down and washed further down, and eventually ends up in the water here. The soil structure deteriorates here because if you grow cereal crops or any crop over and over again every year, it means that no nitrates and organic chemicals are being decomposed back into the soil structure, because as you grow the crops you then take them out, and there's nothing for the decomposers to decompose and replenish the soil with. So it means that the soil structure and level of nutrients decreases over time, and then you're not going to be able to grow crops on there. So there's a couple of things going on here. You've got soil erosion destroying this water system because it can poison it with silt, which is just water with soil mixed into it, and you've also got these this soil structure being destroyed due to overcropping.